This is South Hill Park. For 50 years, this beautiful building has provided Bracknell, a sprawling market town 30 miles west of London, with a flourishing local art scene.
Second home. Feels like a second home. Come here a lot.
It was just magic. There was something magic about it.
Was probably the greatest jazz festival in this country.
It all started here.
It was just glorious and happy.
Incredible friendships, the creative relationships that can only be found at South Hill Park.
But South Hill Park's history reaches back across hundreds of years. This imposing 18th century mansion house, bearing witness to a bleak past, struck by war and woe, tainted by ruptured fortunes, in a chain of events peppered with personal tragedy. And yet, through the darkness came opportunity. This is the tale of so much more than just an art centre, but of a home, a hospital, and a hub for innovation. This is a story of England, of industry, of communication, of creativity, of charity, and of community. Welcome to South Hill Park. No records exist to confirm precisely when the first house was built here, amongst the meadows of what was then known as South Hill. But in 1759, the property was acquired by William Watts, an official of the East India Company who had grown wealthy, overseeing the consolidation of company rule in what would become the British Raj.
William Watts was important in the East India Company in Calcutta and came back with a lot of money he got from Clive and from the local Indian nabob.
It was Watts who significantly rebuilt the existing house as a temple-like classical villa to Palladian designs.
George Canning, he was working in Pitt the Younger's government and he became the Prime Minister briefly in 1817. He owned South Hill Park from 1801 to 1808.
A career politician best known until 2022 as the United Kingdom's shortest-serving Prime Minister, Canning commissioned Sir John Soane to make further alterations to the building. (1853). Sir William Goodenough Hayter purchases South Hill Park, harbouring grand plans to further expand his new mansion. But Sir William would not live to see his vision realised, and on a freezing cold day in December 1878, tragedy struck. Sir William's body was discovered in one of his estate's ponds.
There were 3 suicides. One was Sir William Hayter, but Lady Hayter's maid committed suicide about a year later. Did he commit suicide? His top hat was found floating on the water before his manservant came out and actually found him. So do you put your top hat on at 6 in the morning and go out and throw yourself in the lake, or do you go for a walk and fall in?
Between 1891 and 1897, famed architect Temple Moore remodelled the building, constructing the 4-storey tower and adding the Hayter family's coat of arms above the front entrance. Sir William's only son Arthur oversaw the alterations, transforming his late father's home into the grand Victorian palace we see today. (1914). War tore across Europe, and South Hill Park evolved into a collection centre. People from the surrounding villages brought woolen garments here, which would then be sent to the battlefields of France. Sir Arthur Goodenough Hayter would not live to witness the end of the Great War.
Arthur's widow, Lady Havisham, inherited, on his death in 1917, and she remained here until her death, when it was inherited by her nephew, Graham Rickman, who shot himself in what was then the gun room, which is now the bottom of the lift shaft going up to the recital room.
Graham Rickman would be the last ever private owner of South Hill Park.
I don't know of him actually having depression, but something must have just triggered it. It might have been the next bill or something, and he shot himself. The Second World War, it was much more involved because the Royal Sea Bathing Hospital from Margate was evacuated there because Margate was getting a bit dangerous. They stayed until 1945, but it was also used for soldiers recuperating from their injuries.
Having narrowly avoided being lost to building developers, the estate fell into the hands of the BBC, where it would provide vital broadcasting services in the event of any further national emergencies.
The BBC were looking for a rural property where they could house the European service from Bush House in London should the Cold War hot up, and this is 1951. In fact, apart from storing a large amount of beds and bedding, they didn't actually do anything but draw up plans, except to soundproof a few rooms, which was very useful, one of which still is. They came once a month and inspected the bedding wasn't draping on the floor in case the mice got up it, and they drew plans to build sort of barracks out on the front lawn by North Lake in case they did need to evacuate people, but mercifully, of course, they never did build them.
In December 1962, the BBC sold up. The Bracknell Development Corporation purchased South Hill Park as part of their extension of the designated New Town area.
The Development Corporation were now building to the south of town, but they actually had no use for it at the time, so they leased it to Ferrantes.
My name is David Cann. I came here, South Hill Park, in 1967 as a very junior engineer working for the Aircraft Equipment Department of Ferranti. Ferranti in the 60s were employing about 20,000 people and were very active in the field of government contracts, government defence contracts. I actually took a photograph out of the window of a view from my office. And that's the Italian garden then. It was decided that the research and development part of the aircraft equipment department should be based at Bracknell.
Yeah.
My office was there. Yes. You can see what I mean. Not being able to recognise it. Where's my office? Through there. That was the window. That was the window. It does look like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's a window.
That's right.
How many people worked in this?
I would have thought, while I was here, it must have been well over 150, I would think altogether. Take all the engineers and draftsmen and managers and salesmen and... Yeah, I'm sure that used to be the chief engineer's office. Yeah. The doors are different, because one of the Ferranti policies was that nobody should occupy an office with a door that you couldn't see through. You always had to have windows, so anybody walking by could check there was no hanky-panky going on in the office. At least that's the theory. In the photo, you can see a pencil sharpener and a telephone. I've still got the pencil sharpener and it still works, actually. So we won a contract to develop a piece of equipment which was a gyro-stabilised optical sighting system. This was my idea of how this gyro-stabilised optical system should be designed, and it was really from something like this that I would then go along to the drawing office and we would work out exactly how it should be designed. We did successfully develop such an optical sighting system. It did win a production contract. It was accepted by the Army, who fitted it onto scout helicopters, and rare in these times, it actually saw action in real life in the Falklands War in 1982. We used to have helicopters here. There was a helicopter pad And I used to go up occasionally in the helicopter, and I've got a photograph of an aerial view taken about, well, the late 1960s. Lots of Bracknell was not built around here, and we had our own helicopter landing pad. The company at that time was still being run by the grandsons of the founder. These were Sebastian and Basil de Ferranti. Sebastian used to visit us once a year here, usually during Ascot race time. He used to pop his head around the door, say, "Having fun, lads?" And we say, "Yes, sir." He said, "Who's paying for it?" And we said, "The Ministry of Defence." "Excellent, carry on then." So, you know, that was life, and that's what it was like here. It was jolly good fun.
By the early 1970s, South Hill Park had played a home, a hospital, a broadcasting centre, and a testing ground for future technologies. During its 220-year life. However, its greatest role to date was waiting in the wings.
This idea of just how important having something live and local and participatory as a journey into the arts has been very close to the essence of my being throughout what's now been a long career. The post here was advertised with this 400-seat monstrosity of a theatre stuck on the end of the building in the advertisement as to what the art centre was going to be. And I was incensed because I'd just been through a series of arguments with the community arts movement in the East End of London, who were saying, you know, the future is with the working class in the East End and whatever. And I said, no, we ought to be working in places like bloody new towns, you know, where the aspirant working class are moving to, and that's where we ought to be working. And suddenly comes up this Arts Council sponsored idea in a new town with this fixed rate 400 seat, where if you built that, the only alternative you're going to have would be to advertise to the established market in the Thames Valley. So I steamed into the office of one of my mentors at the Arts Council. What in hell's name, I think I was probably ruder than that, what in hell's name is the Arts Council doing endorsing this? This isn't the way you should do it. You should get the building working first and then build the theatre later on when you've established a local audience. And he said, well, you know, his name was Nigel Abercrombie, he'd been Secretary General, and he said, well, if you feel that strongly, you should apply for it.
It was just something that came out locally in the paper that they were going to make this an arts centre. There was mixed reaction to that. And I came here for a meeting with Peter Stark, the first director. We met on the terrace.
They were building the bar at the time, the old terrace bar. Somebody said, oh, they're looking for barmaids, because you could in those days. When the bar opened upstairs, he took me on and they opened it on Friday in June '74.
Bass Charrington, they ran the cellar bar and they ran the terrace bar, and they had a restaurant in the room above the ceremony room, which we called the Havisham restaurant. Didn't work. When they came to the end of their franchise, we got back into taking control of the bars.
And he was really excited he'd got a drinks licence and he was going to sell real ale. Instrumental at the beginning, the groundwork, the hard work.
It was an old-fashioned bar that just happened to have an arts centre at the back. It was so successful here, it just took off.
I wrote a mumming play about real ale. And I walked into this room and I said, you should get this building and the grounds working first, and then me or my successor, if there's a demand for it, get the theatre.
Now, the whole funding landscape was different. There were very few art centres in the country, certainly outside London, that were directly funded by the Arts Council, and we were. It was a wonderful place to be at that time. There was a lot of growth going on in terms of cultural support, particularly the fact that people came to participate. And I was getting more and more interested in the notion of participatory arts. It was like a little Bauhaus. We had people across the crafts and art forms in residence.
We were all performing, and it was very, very communal in what we did.
One particular artist in residence post, it was funded by the Arts Council. We had a good short list of people, including Anish Kapoor, who's now Sir Anish Kapoor, and a major artist. People wanted to come and work at South Hill Park.
It was a Channel 4 documentary about funding in the arts, and Gavin Henderson was talking about this kind of way that South Hill Park operated with various funding sources and how that really helped art centres develop. And then I saw an advert in The Guardian for a music officer. It started a whole chain of events, changed my life completely. From living in Glasgow, came down here, saw the building, could not believe the building. Was a bit overwhelmed when I saw it, to be honest, at first. Don't forget, this is before the Wild Theatre was built. So it had a kind of an old-world charm. The atmosphere, it was sort of like a family. People worked day and night here. I mean, all the leisure time was spent here. So on New Year's Eve, we had parties here.
There was that kind of friendship. We were trying to create a structure whereby people were required to work together.
Everybody worked for one another.
High achieving. I mean, everybody was a very high achiever in their field, whether it was the jazz festival, whether it was performing arts, whether it was performance arts. In fact, we had a very good reputation for that. We were commissioning composers, so very, very well regarded within the contemporary classical music world.
We had our own record label. So this is Park Records, made in the recording studio through there. It was left over from the BBC. Stan Tracy Octet, the Bracknell Connection, was John Cummings' commission with the Stan Tracy Octet for the 76 festival. The second Handsome Mouldy Warp, that's what the festivals were called. The Handsome Mouldy Warp festivals. A mouldy warp is a Berkshire dialect word for a mole.
So what people might not know is, as well as the Studio Theatre and the Wild Theatre, there's a third theatre at the front. The car park is. You'll see some sort of tunnels, sort of little mini viaducts. In the early 80s, a performance artist here called Alistair Snow, he had an alter ego called Baron Alban. And at the front, if you look at where the car park is and these viaducts, there's the Alban Theatre. There's a plaque still there because he used to do little installations and productions down there at the Alban Theatre.
The sort of main issue about South Hill Park, certainly at that time, was the fact that we had a lot of very, very contemporary, very challenging artists and programmes like the Performance Art Festival, for instance, which was, of its kind, probably the most important in Europe at that moment.
I was like, Visceral Memory has to be the first production I did because that made me feel like I was included, and as a working class council house boy, I could come to South Hill Park and be accepted. So the theatre officer, John Ginman, did a community production of A Midsummer Night's Dream before there was a Wild Theatre. But that was fantastic because John used every possible aspect of what was available, you know, of the grounds. And there were musicians. Ron McAllister composed the music. And we had musicians walking through the woods, and then the audience would be guided back in here. And we did this fantastic, you know, third act in there.
The other side to the challenge, if you like, at that time, was the fact that South Hill Park didn't have an auditorium. The largest space was the recital room, aside from the summer festivals where we put up huge marquees. And so, for me, the great excitement and challenge was to build a theatre. And so we built the Wild Theatre. In fact, that is the poster produced by David Medalla, the artist in residence, for the laying of the foundation stone by the composer Sir Michael Tippett. It was just a wonderful dream, really, building that theatre. Funding it was intriguing, but we raised the money because there was still a New Towns Commission. The last amount of capital funding that was available for making the new town, we got the last bit of that. I was particularly interested in musical theatre and opera work, and so it was one of the things I was determined would be there was an orchestra pit. You know, we were looking at all the savings that could be made, and the orchestra pit on a couple of occasions nearly got cut. But the Musicians' Union actually came in and gave a special grant just for the orchestra pit.
I can remember coming up to South Hill Park when it was just an open space, but they'd poured the concrete for the foundations, looking down and seeing the footprint and the orchestra pit that was full of water and what have you, and even then just sort of thinking, ooh, this is a bit special.
It was just exciting, and I'd been doing some stuff with EBOS, who still do stuff here. So we did the first amateur production of Oklahoma in there. I can't tell you how exciting that was, to actually have our theatre.
Before the Wild had its first performance, they had to do a fire check, you know, check the fire alarm. And Baron Alban, he stood on a 10-foot ladder with a full audience, because we had to check the smoke alarms and everything, and he's saying, "Smoke gets in your eyes." And then he had his members of his company come on with fire extinguishers and stuff. It was bizarre.
It was in the days when there was quite a lot of money in the arts, and I guess because the Wild Theatre was newly funded and there was a lot of interest in it, and there was budget to actually employ a full-time community theatre officer. And in those days, it was a guy called Rene Wright. And one of the first things that they put on here was a community production of The Gondoliers. And it was a rock version of Gilbert Sullivan's Gondoliers. And I always remember that on the opening night, the first, I don't know, 32 bars of the overture were played as is in the original Sullivan score. And then round about bar 32, the electric guitar cut in, and you could hear seats tipping up as people got up and walked out.
The whole movement for art centres was really born of the 70s. It's kind of faded as, I don't know now whether there are associations. There was the Association of Southern Art Centres, ASAC and ASWAC, and I thought there should be a Bendigo as well. And we all met, you know, the conferences, and we moved around. I don't think that sort of happens in the same way now, because it was all part of a pressure group to force mainly the Arts Council and the regional arts boards, but also local authorities, to take note of what an arts centre could really mean and how it could change the whole nature of a particular community in a very positive way.
South Hill Park had begun to firmly establish itself as the new centre of Bracknell's burgeoning arts scene. But soon it would become best known for two thoroughly British forms of live entertainment.
We had enough money then. I had a festival of contemporary music that I ran, and when we decided to have a South American Spanish theme, I commissioned and had world premieres of 21 different pieces of music. It was such a remarkable weekend that the British Music Yearbook phoned up to say, "Is it true? Did you actually have all these world premieres in one weekend?" So there was WOMAD, there was the Folk and Roots Festival, and there was the Jazz Festival. We had a 3-festival structure. Jazz Festival, again, it's one of these things that it kind of grew outside of the site, and it's now become really the London Jazz Festival, with John Cummings still running it.
It was probably the greatest jazz festival in this country. And we had the Jazz Festival, we had the Folk Festival. They were very major events.
The Folk Festival was attracting crowds of thousands, with household names drawn to perform on the lawn of the former manor house.
And as if things weren't bad enough already, the Pilgrim Borismen returned to the fray.
We'd have about 3,000 people, I think, coming, and they'd all camped in the field opposite. And it was a precursor of the sort of music festivals that are now happening all over the place. But South Hill Park was a real pioneer in all sorts of ways.
People would travel quite a long way that were into the folk scene to come, or just local people would come because they might have been into folk, or they might have just gone to the festival, lots of beer for 2 days. Friday and Saturday night, used to have a big ceilidh in the Wild Theatre, so they'd take all the seats out. So when everything finished outside at 10:30 or whatever it was for noise and neighbours and things, would all pile into the Wild Theatre, and that would go on till, I don't know, midnight, I suppose. It was fantastic.
We're just phenomenal. We'd have amazing people here. There's a picture of Charlie Watts playing in this very room just behind me there, you know.
The early festivals were a major success, but Ron and his team had plans to further capitalise on the Arts Centre's newfound form of income.
All the infrastructure was there, so we tried to maximise that by having different kinds of festivals for 3 consecutive weekends, and that format worked for many years.
Hard work and enormous fun, because bear in mind, at one point we just had the 1, then we had the 2, and then we had the 3, over 3 weekends.
During the folk festival, there was a lunchtime session where the rules were never the same song twice and no instruments. And it was just, and people would say, right, let's do sea songs, and you did sea songs, and then you did farming songs, and the improvised harmonies down in that extraordinary sound environment, tears pouring down my face just at the beauty of it.
It did have a, looking back now, it does feel that it was kind of a bygone age, because festivals are just ubiquitous. Everywhere has a festival now.
The Bracknell Folk and Roots Festival soon evolved to welcome a far wider range of musical genres.
Then it got really good, in my opinion. It was just a mixture. They had folk bands, local bands, and a maybe well-known-ish person coming along.
What I loved about that festival was the flow of the day. It was a beautiful experience for families during the day, and then as the families went home about dusk. There was great evening entertainment, cabarets and dance acts and that sort of thing.
And you're right up close, you know, I think I booked Ian Jury, who was a big hero of mine for a festival, so that was quite a big deal for me.
My friend Matthew used to organise all the backstage things, and so he'd help when all the bands arrived, unloading all their kit and getting on the stage and doing the sound checks and things. And so his friends, our friends, used to all help because it was free labour, we got free ticket. I didn't do it, I used to just camp backstage and just sneak in that way. So David Byrne arrived, who everybody working backstage was of an age where they loved Talking Heads back in the day. And he just turned up really early, was really, really nice. And he just saw my friend Simon's bike leaning up against the tree, and he went, oh, whose bike is that? I said, well, I've got, 3 hours before I need to come back for the sound check. So he just got on the bike and he went off and he just cycled round Birch Hill for a couple of hours and explored. And I think that's the coolest thing, that David Byrne just cycled round Birch Hill for 2 hours, came back and did a gig.
While South Hill Park was now highly respected within the music world, one unlikely corner of the estate was about to begin playing host to yet another form of popular entertainment. Comedy.
The comedy came about because we had something called the Cabaret Night on a Friday. And it was getting a bit hit and miss, because sometimes there'd be a speciality act, sometimes there'd be a band. The audience wasn't really consistent. There was something new called alternative comedy, which we'd sort of just heard about, really. And so Simon Houlihan, who was working with me at the time, we went along to see what was happening at the Tunnel Club, which was a famous alternative club run by Malcolm Hardy.
He ran a night called Sunday Night at the Tunnel Palladium, which was just, it was mayhem, but it was wonderful.
They had the thing with the gong, people would go on, and once everyone started booing, they'd hit the gong and the next comedian would go on. But people got really, really sort of involved and actually started throwing glasses at one point.
Dangerous and chaotic, and it was everything I kind of loved about those days of the so-called alternative comedy.
So we said to Malcolm, do you think that might work, at South Hill Park? Do you think you'd like to try? So for a year, he was compere and he brought the acts with him. And it just began to sell out every single Friday.
The late, great Malcolm Hardy. I liked the chaos of it and the edginess of it, and you never really knew what was going to happen. I mean, it was genuinely very exciting.
You name them who are famous within comedy now, We've had them virtually all down here over the years.
I also used to get very kind of starstruck with these quite famous people coming down or that had started to make a name for themselves. People like Joe Brand and Harry Enfield and Harry Hill, and that were already sort of cutting their teeth on the London circuit. And we kind of became an extension of that.
Houlihan is the man who started me off in one of the first people who believed in me at the Bracknell Comedy Club. I remember he called me up once. He goes, I'd like to come back and do another set. And I was all cool. I said, yeah. How much? He went, £80. I said, yeah. When? He said, Thursday night. I said, yeah, sure. Just one set, not 2 nights. I said, no, fine. Take care. And I went, yes! He's booked me again. Yes! Houlihan's booked me again.
We used to have all sorts of weird and wonderful acts. You know, street performers, performance poets, kind of lefty comedians, the anti-Thatcher, all that kind of cliche stuff. You know, there was a guy called Chris Luby, who's no longer with us, sadly, but he just did extraordinary impressions of Spitfires and things.
The Greatest Show on legs, they would actually dance on stage, end up taking their clothes off with balloons. And then the balloons would pop and then they'd run.
I think it was the Iceman who just literally had a block of ice on stage and would melt a block of ice. And that was his act for 20 minutes.
Malcolm did it for a year, and then we gradually just took over running it ourselves.
He was a bit of a legendary character, but and a fantastic guy, but very shambolic. And I think I'd be forgiven for saying that. And I owe everything to him. I mean, I owe everything to Malcolm, because without him, I would never have got into this business. You know.
All the big names that you see in the world theatre started out doing the Comedy Club, and the Comedy Club still runs.
It's been going for over 35 years. We're always discovering new talent, and that's one of the joys about running a club like this. You know, we get every week there's something new and different, and that's why it's exciting.
I meant to do 20 minutes. I'm not gonna.
Pretty much everyone that's done Live at the Apollo has appeared here at some point. It's such a great room. All the acts love playing this room. It's got a fantastic vibe. It's got the low ceiling, the brick walls, and all that kind of thing. The atmosphere in here is just so tremendous.
It's not hot, is it? It's quite a hot little cellar, isn't it? It's a hot little cellar. They've blocked up some of the... There used to be an air vent here. Some of you look like you've probably been coming here since there was an air vent here. I have. A very funny thing happened to me at doing this gig quite some years ago. There was a bloke heckling me, and I dealt with him as best I could, and he kept coming back at me, and I kept slamming him, and eventually he was asked to leave, and off he went, and I continued with the show, and about 6 minutes later, he started fucking heckling me through the... It was the best heckle I've ever had.
And quite often these younger acts are coming through and they're in their 20s and 20s and 30s, and they're like going, wow, this has been going since before I was even born, which makes me and Butch feel extremely old.
It's still got that musty smell. The mould in the corner, bless it, is still there.
Nothing's really changed.
South Hill Park had made it into the 21st century. But how would this unique arts centre evolve to survive a financial crash, major cuts to the arts, and a global pandemic?
We were absolutely building it to be able to continue to evolve, the building, the challenges of which have not changed. And the joys of which have not changed. And I suppose that the old lady has survived as well as it has is a credit to the original builders. And this wonderful flexibility that it's had to be able to flex and change over time. And I think I got a reasonable number of the basic layout decisions within the building right. Yeah? So that's a nice feeling.
Over the last 10 years, the Arts Centre's lost almost £600,000 a year in funding so far, with no guarantees for the future, which is about a third of its annual income has gone. And that's quite a difficult message to convey to your community, people in the arts. You know, why are you spending so much time and energy bringing in weddings? But it's a means to an end.
Rolling whenever you're ready. Hello, I'm James Sunderland and I'm proud to be the MP in Bracknell. I'm at South Hill Park. Hello, I'm James Sunderland and I'm proud to be the MP in Bracknell. I'm at Southill Park today on this fantastic summer's day. If you look around now, you've got the most amazing sights. You've got flowers and trees and you've got families having picnics, children playing sport, and the restaurant is full. It's a great place to come, and I'm here today to commend this fantastic facility. It is part funded, it's community run, it's community owned, and it's here to be used. So please come and use the facility. Please bring your families here. We're looking to do open air concerts here in the summer. We're looking to make the best use of the ground, perhaps hire it out for weddings. There's so much more we need to do because this place costs money, and without your support it will fall over. So please come and help and support Southill Park. Thank you. How was that?
For the past 2 decades, the park has faced sobering economic adversity, including, perhaps most seriously, the financial crash of 2008. However, its finances, in tandem with public money once provided to ensure the continued success of arts centres and other non-profit community assets across the country, have gradually been stripped away. Paired with a global pandemic, life at Southill Park is at risk.
The only way this project was possible was because it was a fundamental part of the policy of the Arts Council and Southern Arts, when we had Southern Arts, to be at this joining point of the arts and community in a building such as this. So the whole funding strategy from the beginning was a major slice of capital, which was the responsibility of the Development Corporation principally, but then a balance of revenue support between the Town Council and the District Council and the Arts Council and Southern Arts. And to watch, as I have done over the 50 years, that part of the brief being set aside by the Arts Council, partly because the area is now very wealthy, and it wasn't before, which I sort of understand. But the willingness of the board here and the funders to continue to fund the community dimension of the arts that happens here, that ability to maintain a commitment to the art and to the artist, as well as to the just the demands of the business model, to challenge the programming comfort zone of your own audience is always a difficult thing to do. So and that's fundamentally changed. And to get the national cultural policy realigned to working with the Art Centre movement is something that I think ought to be a project for your generation, Mark.
And I think that actually Southill Park is probably at the start of a new chapter, a really exciting chapter, a next stage of that evolution where its focus, more than ever before, is on serving the community. The reduction in funding has been a huge challenge, and that's completely undeniable. However, that cut in funding has been a huge opportunity. It's forced the people here to innovate, the staff to innovate, the people that we work with to innovate, and to think differently about the function of the Arts Centre, the purpose of the Arts Centre, and the work that it's creating and who it's creating it for, or perhaps better still, who it's creating it with.
The arts are for everyone because they're so good for us.
I mean, funding, it is a huge, huge factor. Imagine if we had the luxury, we call it luxury, which seems so silly, but the luxury of resource, the ability to make stuff about that pressure.
Like most people you talk to here, a lot of staff will be part-time at Southill Park and juggling a lot of different freelance projects. So that's true for me and Becky.
It's getting that balance between creativity and trying to develop something new, as opposed to just giving people sort of commercial stuff that they want. You have to push the boundaries, but you need to get the money. And as the Arts Council has withdrawn funding, particularly for somewhere like this over the last few years, it's been precarious. And I think Craig has done, who's running the place currently, has had to walk a tightrope. just to keep the place open.
Now, in its 50th year, South Hill Park is facing serious questions about its future viability as an arts centre. During a cost of living crisis, South Hill Park's current team of leaders must contemplate innovative new ways in which to allow the arts centre to flourish for another 50 years.
There's space for everyone to participate in arts in the way they want to, but also these cultural institutions, especially when they are funded by everyone, by our taxes, they should be led by what it is that everyone wants to participate in, and not kind of gatekeeping or creating barriers to people getting to access those amazing potential for well-being and connection.
And I think it's so important, and I find this in my work here, especially because I am working so closely with schools, with young children. Some of these children have never ever stepped inside an art centre before. And when I'm on the ground with those schools, with those children that are coming here for the first time, it's incredible.
Without South Hill Park, I probably wouldn't want to be an actor. Arts wasn't really available to me back when I lived in Barbados, and even when I was at school in England. So having a place so close that I could learn to express myself, professional environment that encourages kids to try new skills and to follow their dreams, all the skills I've learned through doing shows and doing dancing and drama can be applied to giving a science presentation, can be applied to public speaking with English. It can help kids develop in so many more ways.
People watch Netflix now, everything is so immediate, isn't it? Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, whatever it is. But those industries are only made possible by people being inspired to get involved in a community show, having a go backstage at grassroots level, especially young people as well, grassroots level. These skills and those interests are born in places like this. You remove somewhere like South Hill Park from the national picture, and what are you left with? Where are those young people going to be inspired to pursue those creative industries that we all know and have access to?
The diversity of people within it that make it a very accepting place. As Black Eye Theatre, we tour to 50, 60 different venues a year, and I'd say South Hill Park is unrivaled in terms of the artistic opportunities it offers people in the UK. Certainly when I look at all the venues we tour to, none of them come close to South Hill Park in terms of the range and diversity of opportunities. I owe a lot to Ron McAllister, who was chief exec here. He gave me a lot of advice when I was starting out, and certainly started tour booking. So the link with South Hill Park was quite early on in the process, and at some point we became an associate company, and then subsequently a resident theatre company. I don't think Black Eye Theatre would be still going today if it wasn't for South Hill Park.
I still am so proud of the productions when I come here, Christmas shows, Easter shows. I just think this is amazing. The standard of what is achieved here is incredible.
If I think of Jack Hughes and John Rowley, who were the Newtown Development Corporation, if they're up there, they will be being very, very proud of what's happened here. The culture of this wealthy part of the Royal County of Berkshire is very different from what the political culture on the estates was when I was here. I wouldn't have come here unless I'd been coming to a Labour, and I don't mean that I'm party political in this, but to a left project, and that's both the Newtown planning framework of the 46 Act, as being really profoundly driven by the town and country planning movement of the 30s, and to a council that was absolutely rooted in the people who were coming here rather than the businesses that were locating. That was the Development Corporation's job. And there was one of the meeting points was the informality of the board of South Hill Park that had the Development Corporation and the private sector and the Labour politicians on it.
Just the best training ground I could ever wished for in terms of just working in the arts and music and comedy. It was a great place to be. It still is.
How old were you when Dominic put you into playing the young Lorca in the studio? 14. Was I that young? I think you were. Because I remember thinking at the time, my husband was in the music business, funny enough, and we sat at the back because we thought we better not sit too near the front. This was my first visit. I remember saying to my husband after, we just sat there in the studio after it finished. And I said, I tell you what, she's got something. She's got that extra bit of magic. We've got to let her do it if she wants to do it. So, and that was it. That was the start. So it started here. It all started here.
It's important not just on an artistic level, but you know that it builds confidence for people if they take part in activities, encourages people out to try things.
I would go so far as to say it kind of prompted me to become an actor because especially the whole feeling here, it's such a community and you know, and that's what theatre is. It's like you really feel like you're part of something. What will happen if we don't have that? What will happen if you don't take away art from our day-to-day lives? What would you do with your day? Plus the fact they do great food and wine.
I've had lots of personal things happen in my life, you know, family losses, serious illnesses. And to know that there's a sort of a group of people or a place that, you know, doesn't judge you, will step up and help you, is just invaluable.
A lot of the time people forget what the arts delivers to society. It's not just a white middle class piece of entertainment. Arts does so much more for people within our community, whether that's tackling isolation, people living with various different illnesses, mental health, young people, career opportunities, building confidence, opening horizons.
You know, this building represents the noblest form of creativity in our society, and this place does it exemplary. I don't know anywhere like this place.
Southwark Park, I think, has a unique role in the country in terms of bringing the arts and the community together, and in how professionals and amateurs can work together in the most productive possible way, bringing the best out of each other. And I think it's a model for other parts of the country, get the best out of both the professional and the amateur communities.
I've often said it's like, I suppose you're the family, really.
To enable creativity to be open to anybody and everybody. It shouldn't be an elitist thing. So, yeah, long live Southwark Park, I say.
And there was a sense of happiness, including on my old bloody centre manager's face at the sheer amount of money he was taking on his hamburger stall. You know, it was just a real sense of, this is just glorious. And it was just glorious and happy and sunny. And we had our daughter, and it was magnificent. Worth it all. In comes I, St. George, the patron saint of England. I always appear when country's in trouble. Last time I were here, it were all bloody rubble, but that were quite minor, though we got quite dented, compared to the fate of the pubs I frequented. I went into a bar and asked for a jar, and the barman looked up with a grin like a scar. He said, red or black label, and smiled. I said, mild. He said, who? And I hit him with this, wouldn't you? Well, I looked round the bar for a sign of me friends, and there wasn't one there. And all thirst without end, the changes were drastic. It were all made of plastic, including the flowers. I went round the bend. I said, pint of best bitter. Even that raised a titter, but I paid for it quiet. You got to be fair. It were queerly dispensed, and me no sort of sensed it were mostly compounded of ullage and air. So I lifted it up, took a sup, near threw up. It was horrible, pitiful, but have no fear. I will root out and clobber the evil sick robber who's watered and slaughtered our own English beer.